COVID. So it's been
This
about
meeting
2
is
weeks.
being recorded.
Been about 2 weeks since I got it. I'm not quite completely free. Normally I'd be with Jeff and we'd be doing the Jeff and Mike show, but we're not going to do it. So anyway, let me clear things up here. This evening we have a really interesting speaker. I've always sort of had a soft spot in my heart for UFOs and extraterrestrial life, and I've always thought it fascinating. Jeff, our vice president, has found a wonderful speaker from UFON, which is a very reputable organization, and I think he will be able to present some interesting viewpoints about all of this. And I think all of us should at least keep an open mind because it's a really fascinating subject. So Jeff, why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest speaker this evening, and I think you're all going to have a great time.
All right. Hi, everybody. Again, it's so good to see everybody. We seem to have quite a bit of people on tonight. So I'm actually quite excited about tonight's speaker. About 6 or 7 years ago, I can't remember how long ago it was, I was asked to give a talk representing us to a UFO club, which is different than what Dr. Felfly's got. It was a UFO club, and I thought you guys should come and talk to us, and they sort of dissolved and never heard from them again. So I searched out this MUFON, and what we came up with was Dr. Felfly. And
we now return control of your television sets back to you.
That was going well until Jeff was abducted.
Yes. So Jeff is frozen for the moment. Would you like to take over, Mike?
Yes, definitely. I have no idea what to say at this moment, but anyway. Okay. In the meantime, is Doug here? Is Doug here? Christensen? Oh, now I've lost you. I have no idea what's going on here.
Doug, even though you're unmuted, we still can't hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Mike. We can't hear Doug.
Okay. Well, okay. I was going to make an announcement about Oak Park and what's going on there. Maybe I can say a little bit and you can clarify it later on. But he's been asked by the people at Oak Park about using their place over there to have our meetings. So I think a lot of you members, certainly the executive board knows about it. But that seems like a very practical way for us to have the public during the COVID times. And assuming this works out, it wouldn't mean that we can't do the Pacific one at UOP as well as time goes by. But at least for right now, we have an interim thing. And if it works out really well, we'll be able to have the general public and hopefully get more members and non-members to attend. And that would certainly make it more interesting and a viable thing. And then it would also introduce people to the fact that we do have telescopes at the park and that we do have public viewing. So hopefully that in itself is going to be a real positive thing. I'm certain that he can give more details to the whole thing, but it seems like it's going to work pretty well. Does anyone have any questions or anything that perhaps? Go ahead, Sherry. Maybe someone wants to ask. I'll unmute in just a moment.
So doesn't look like there's any questions at this point. Oh, I got a call from Jeff.
All right.
Hey, Jeff. Well, our apologies. When Jeff asked me to remove one of his images on here, eventually that got around and blocked him off altogether. So he cannot get back in because the host has previously removed him. So lesson for your next Zoom meeting.
Jerry, would you like me to go ahead and introduce the speaker then?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, I'm doing it on the fly, so please forgive me, Doctor. But anyway, let me read your abstract. And am I saying this right? Felfly? How do you say your last name, Doctor?
Yes, Felfly, yeah.
Felfly, okay. So Dr. Felfly has a PhD in molecular biology from the University of Montreal in Canada, a master's in microbiology and molecular biology from the Lebanese American University in Lebanon, and a BS in medical laboratory science from the Lebanese University. He's a MUFON, which is a Mutual UFO Network certified field investigator, and has investigated over 118 reported sightings. He is currently at the Defense Language Institute at Monterey, California. His resume is quite long and impossible to present completely. Gentlemen, this is a heavyweight. This is someone I think that's going to be very insightful, and I hope all of you enjoy his lecture. So, Dr. Felfly, go ahead, Dr. Felfly, and start your lecture, and we're going to be listening, I hope.
Thank you very much, Mike, for the introduction. And I'm glad to be here, and thanks for the invitation. So let me just go ahead and share my screen. Okay, I'm just trying to go into. All right, so it might be taking a second. All right, so basically for today's talk, I want to call it, as you can see, from the DNA to the universe, life on Earth, extraterrestrials, and UFOs. So basically, I'm putting a slightly different approach. Of course, as you know, the UFO or the ufology field is very controversial, and we have a lot of different theories. Some people believe it, some people don't. We have different perspectives. So I'll be presenting a number of those. I'm going to start, however, with an alternative view for how the universe formed and how life on Earth formed, or how it could have formed. And then from there, I'm going to go into some evidence, ancient and recent, about UFOs being seen here on Earth and something that they may have left as well. I'm going to go over some classifications of UFOs as well, done by one of the MUFON branches. And then I will go over some evidence also, not only on Earth, but also on some bodies in the solar system for what we believe to be artificial structures as well. And then I would end with a few examples of some actual cases that we had at California MUFON as well. So as you're probably familiar with, the current theory that, or the theory that's maybe more accepted for the origin of the universe is the Big Bang. Which, according to that theory, basically stipulates that there was a big explosion, the matter scattered all over from that one explosion. Now, eventually, it formed the planets and stars and the galaxies and the universe. Now, according to that, if you follow it, then we can assume or conclude that the building blocks for life should have spread everywhere because they're coming from a common source, and therefore life could exist everywhere. Of course, if you look at how organized the universe is, like once you look at the solar system on top platforms, we could see how we have a sun, a star at the center. We have planets that are orbiting in a very organized way around it. We have most planets have their moons around them also orbiting in a nice way. And then you look at the galaxies themselves, how organized they are, and so on. So this makes it, very hard to believe that the universe have formed by chance. Like, according to the Big Bang, everything is scattered, and then somehow, by chance, spontaneously, some pieces will come together. They have to melt to form the planets, and they have to solidify, and so on and so forth, which doesn't make much sense to a lot of people in the ufology, and also for me. Now, again, if the matter is moving outwards, what is going to hold it? What's going to make it stop, let alone what's going to bring it together? And this cannot form by chance. And then if you look at planets like Earth, for instance, we have oceans on Earth. If matter came together spontaneously, water particles would be just embedded within the rest of the particles, but maybe they have like wet rock, for instance, but not have those organized oceans as well, let alone having the atmosphere. So how else could the universe have formed? One of the theories I think of is that could have been an early intelligence, maybe maybe a form of energy that, or energy, a life form that doesn't necessarily need an actual physical place to be, and got developed a lot, or maybe a type of extraterrestrial that's far more advanced, that they live in a different universe than ours, and then eventually created that. Now, of course, if you look at it, like I said, it looks designed, looks engineered, right? Again, so that's one possibility. Now, if this is the case, well, then these same extraterrestrials and maybe others could have eventually, created life on Earth, a physical life. If they don't need bodies, maybe they created some form of life that needs physical bodies. Now, speaking of life, how life appeared on Earth. So one of the very much the theory that is repeating a lot in academia is the so-called sea of primordial soup, or organic sea of primordial soup, or sea of primordial organic soup. So we have a variety of it. So what theory stipulates is that long ago on Earth, there was like a large ocean full of water, and then because of lots of lightning or volcanoes and so on, atoms that were found there somehow by chance formed molecules, and then by chance these molecules formed amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, and then by chance these amino acids formed longer chains and eventually proteins, and then by chance these proteins somehow thought that they have to preserve a memory of them, like some record. So RNA formed, which is a single stranded form of the genetic material. And then they somehow by chance also the RNA thought that it's unstable, it needs to be more stable, so DNA formed as well. And then unicellular organisms formed, and the evolution happened until humans formed. Now, I'm going to show you here just the next few slides why this is unlikely, why this really cannot be the case. So this is the DNA, and the basic building blocks of the DNA, we have very much four, what we call adenine and guanine, thymine, and cytosine. Now, the first level of organization is that it's a very specific way of binding together. For instance, adenine on one chain will have to bind to thymine. Nothing else can work. And guanine on one chain will have to bind to cytosine. Nothing else can work. Now, let's look at the RNA versus DNA. I'm going to just keep it within humans, basically, within, let's say, higher animals, because in viruses, we have some RNA viruses. Let's just talk about humans. Our genetic material is preserved in the DNA, double-stranded. And then we have what we call a messenger RNA, which is a single-stranded RNA that appears temporarily. So what's the job of that? Let's say we want to produce a protein. So the DNA to helix, double helix, will just unwind a little bit. Then a machinery will produce a copy of it in the form of RNA. And then after that, another machinery will translate that message into proteins. Now, the RNA has very much the same structure as the DNA, or same sequence, I have to say. The only difference is that we have uracil as a nucleotide instead of thymine. Now, just looking at this one here, basically, already we have the four nucleotides. We have how they bind, that's another level of organization. We have how they are transcribed into RNA in order to produce proteins. Now, then we have the DNA code. So what's the DNA code? So these four nucleotides, they can arrange by 64 different ways. So let's say the A represents adenine, U represents uracil, G represents guanine, and C represents cytosine. So you could have many different forms. So we found that the basic coding sequence, if you want, or coding unit, is a sequence of 3 of those. Any 3 will form a basic unit of coding, and we call it a codon. Now, as the cell is trying to make proteins, well, every codon or every few codons are recognized by a special type of RNA, and that RNA will carry a particular amino acid. So now every codon will code for a certain amino acid. So that's another level of organization. And then if we look at the whole thing, basically what you could see here, sometimes we have 2 codons coding for the same amino acid. Sometimes you have 6, like for instance, leucine, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 coding for leucine. So we have a total of 20 amino acids. And then we have one amino acid, which or a codon that also functions as so-called start codon. It tells the machinery when the protein starts. And also we have what we call stop codon. They tell when the protein ends, basically. So now imagine what we have, 20 amino acids coded by this code. Now, how can this be random as a code? So see the different levels. Now, one can even take it a step further. What if, for instance, we can find a different planet that instead of having 4 or 6 codons coding for one amino acid, maybe every 2 codons only code for one amino acid. All of a sudden, we have 10 or 15 more amino acids, like 35 or 40. And if every single codon codes for a different amino acid, then we're looking at about 61 amino acids. Imagine with what we have, this 20, how much complexity we have for life on Earth. Now, multiply that by 3, having about 61 amino acids, we can have something far more complex. So that's why, again, all this point that DNA could not have been formed by chance like the theory stipulates. I apologize for actually, I forgot the person who quoted that. So I'm quoting someone, but I couldn't really find the name. So the quote is that someone said once that if you take the Encyclopedia Britannica and you tear it into tiny, tiny pieces and you throw it from an airplane in the atmosphere, the odds that those pieces will form the Encyclopedia Britannica in a correct way are much higher than DNA itself forming by chance. So just take a look at the DNA. Again, I'm showing this one more time to see the double helix. And you saw the RNA, how it looks like. Keep that in mind, because as I go through some evidence, we're going to actually see why this comes in play in some ancient evidence that we have. So then how about the different points of life here? Well, the current age of the universe, I'm going to say it's estimated between 15 to 20 billion years. It goes up and down a little bit, once hit 17 billion and so on. And the estimated age of Earth is close to 4.5 billion years. And, now almost all stars have planets. And again, life could have appeared at any planet since the beginning of the universe, right? So if the universe started billions of years ago, well, if life appeared on some planet, let's say 10 billion years ago, they could have had much more time to develop and to evolve compared to us, for instance. Now, this theory, of that I said earlier that, life, so since life cannot have appeared by chance, and therefore it could have been brought here by some extraterrestrial form. So as if life was brought to Earth and probably to other planets by an advanced extraterrestrial life. Now, this is a more complex theory, if you want, than the panspermia. The panspermia stipulates that life in the universe in general came by some microbes or some, building blocks of life that were carried by meteorites. However, the theory that is circulated in ufology, and I also support, is that somehow life was brought here. Humans were brought here to Earth by another civilization, and not only once, actually more than once. I'm going to actually show some examples as to why it is like so. Also, one interesting book, if you like to read, is by Ellis Silver. He actually called this book "Humans Are Not from Earth." Some of the things he discusses is that, for instance, humans, we are the only species who gets cataract, very much almost the only one, gets cataract from the sun. We get skin cancer, for instance. When we are born, we are debilitated. It takes us years before we can, be a little bit on their own. We're still with our parents, while most animals, not almost all, they, shortly after they're born, they're doing their own thing and so on. So we seem to be not really that suited for the planet, so to speak. Now, for life on Earth, okay, so based on what is currently accepted, is that, assuming the current theory, we have Homo erectus appeared around 3 or 4 million years ago, and then it colonized Africa starting about maybe 2 million years ago. And then modern humans appeared about 200,000 years ago, and civilization as we know it appeared 6,000 years ago. And then industrialization started roughly in the, actually I should say 1700, 1800, so in the 18th century, 1700. However, we have evidence that civilization and technology has been used on Earth much earlier than the 1700s and much earlier than 6,000 years ago. And therefore, some intelligent life must have appeared on Earth a while back, okay? And not only once, more than once. So what evidence? Okay, well, for instance, if you look in Bolivia, the Pumapunku, there's a site that is there to be about 17,000, 22,000 years old. And here you see those large stone blocks, for instance. They sometimes they're called the H block. You can stack them on top of each other and see how they are, they are made of sandstone and andesite. This is hard rock. Sandstone is roughly the hardness of quartz, and andesite like 7 on the scale. So it's pretty hard. So we can't really, assume that this has been chiseled. And look at, some rocks are like this. So this really even today, it takes quite a bit of time to do that. So there definitely has been some technology used at that time. And then in Turkey, in Göbekli Tepe, they discovered under the sand at some point a city made of a circular city, or city made of circles, of stone circles. And when they unearthed some of them, for instance, you could see we had like columns, and then on the columns are all these engravings, for instance. And again, one can say that they cannot be done by just chisels, for instance. Again, some form, and again, this is very old, much older than 6,000 years ago. So all the civilizations that exist somehow at that time. And then in Egypt, for instance, we have in the temple of Seti in Abydos, once they were doing some renovation, some maintenance, and then a flap of stone fell from the ceiling, and it exposed something underneath, this rock here that we see. And then you could see, for instance, things that are engraved on it, actually not engraved, it's like almost like bumpy. So somehow it was created with what looks like a helicopter, what looks like either a submarine or a cylinder-shaped UFO, what looks like for instance, a glider here can be a flying saucer, and so on. And this is, thousands of years ago. And again, I said 3,500 plus because more and more we have evidence that structures in Egypt are older than what we think they are. Like the pyramids, for instance, we think that they are 10,500 BC rather than only 3,000 or 4,000 years. Let me see why this is not moving. Okay, now. All right, and then in the Mozambique, in Maputo, they discovered a city also that's dated to be roughly 200,000 years old, and it's also made up of circular structures. Basically, you have many of these, and it's thought to be part of an ancient city, roughly 10,000 square kilometers, and there are roads that are joining circular structures that are quite complex with some agricultural areas. So again, this indicates that there was some advanced civilization at that time to build it. And then we have the famous Dendera lamp. Again, a lot of controversy about these. Some Egyptologists tell us that these are not lamps, that this is a lotus, lotus with like the aroma coming out of it. However, if you look closely, you see that there's this filament, right? Then this thing here looks like a Tesla coil almost. And then that looks like a cable that's plugged in something that looks like a battery. So highly unlikely to be a flower. And then we see many depictions of it. Then there's the Baghdad battery. I will show some actual pictures of them in a bit later. But again, Baghdad battery with an electrolyte solution. We have an iron bar and a copper cylinder. Now, this has been actually reproduced, and it can generate a few volts of electricity. Now, what can a few volts be used for? Well, some people, I'm not showing here for the sake of time, but some people combine Baghdad battery with the reproduction of the Dendera lamp, and they found that actually the two together, you end up getting light. So it works. The batteries, they had to hook up a few batteries together, and then this means that both are really true, the battery and the lights. Now, how did humans evolve on Earth then? All right. So the classical theory, natural evolution. We have the missing link. Of course, every time something new gets discovered, we say that's the missing link until eventually Lucy got discovered. But Lucy was discovered in hundreds of pieces in like bones. And it was a partial body. It's not even the full body of Lucy. And all those who are experts in the field, they look at it, they say, well, that's just a monkey. It can't be, it's not our ancestor. Now, what's the proposed theory? Well, one is a genetic intervention from advanced extraterrestrial civilization. And what I would add to it is not just genetic intervention as in hybridizing, but also partly bringing humans here from elsewhere. And then eventually other civilization came and hybridized whoever was here with them, and so on and so forth. That makes more sense then. So now, other evidence for early ancient alien visits to Earth? Well, let's see. Well, we have a number of paintings, for instance, that clearly depict UFOs in them. Like, for instance, in the crucifixion painting dating to 1350, for instance. What's interesting is that on the left side here, left corner, and the right corner, we see what looks like UFO flying. And in the ancient times, anyone that was religious, they would put a halo around them. Like you see a halo around Jesus and so on. But then we don't see halos around the two guys here in those ships. So clearly, whoever drew that somehow had some information, was told something, found something, some text, whatever, that led him to know that, and that these are not, they're not saints or something religious, that there's something else going on. And then there's a UFO depiction in the 4th century event. It's called the Miracle of the Snow in the 1400s. And basically here they depict Jesus and Mary appearing on top of a cloud. But then behind them, the painter clearly depicted what looks like flying saucers. And they were very precise on what they depict. So again, what is it that they saw? And then we see in the Madonna painting, something similar. On the top right corner, we have what looks like a flying saucer. And then we can see on the close-up, there's a man standing looking at it. His dog seems to be seeing it, and so on. Again, what did people, these people see? Then UFO appear in a painting created in the 1538, the Triumph of Summer Tapestry. And again, on top, you'll see those little things that just look like flying saucers as well, and they're very clearly depicted. And then there is this, nobody knows who created that painting. It has inscriptions in German, but the translation loosely it's Israel, put your hope in the Lord. Now here we could see a building or a church that's burning. On top of it, there's a giant saucer-shaped UFO. And then also in the painting of the baptism, we could see a UFO shining some rays on the baby Jesus. Again, for these to be depicted this way, whoever drew them must have either read something, saw something, got information. Otherwise, why would they draw these this way, especially that this is like, many hundreds of years ago. And then there's the famous woodcut in Nuremberg. In basically the 1561, they discovered that it actually depicts many flying objects in like an aerial barrel almost, between cylinder-shaped objects, between cross-like objects. We have spheres as well, and then one giant maybe arrow-shaped object as well. And some of them appear to be falling and crashing. And we have some actual photographs, like for instance, in 1967, basically Harold Trudell took images of a few saucers near his home in Rhode Island. Here we are seeing 2 of them. And then this is, if today we see that, we might say it's the, SpaceX Starlink. However, this was also in 1967, and there were like these flares of light that appeared this way as well. And then there is this one in 1987 in Connecticut, about above Newtown, and basically Randy Etting captured this image as well. And then if you look more recently, let's say the last couple of years, there were 3 pyramid-shaped UFOs that hovered over or flew over the USS Russell in March 2021. This was actually confirmed by the Navy, and these are the images released by it. And then there's an image taken by a pilot, so it's at a different angle. Then we have a spherical UFO that was photographed from the USS Omaha, and it appeared diving into the water. You could see first it's above the water level, then almost touching the water level, and then after that it's just went in. And then there's this famous, I don't know if you got to see that, in November 9, 2021, quite recent, UFO that's very, very glowy orange, was flying over France. It was seen in at least 5 cities. Many people took videos. Actually, I saw the video of it as well. That's where I took these snapshots, and it's making some turns that are, no regular airplane would make, basically, like go vertical, horizontal, flip, and so on. It wasn't moving too fast, but not too slow either. It was dubbed either a perfect hoax or the kind of the sighting of the century. So far as I know, no one has come forward to claim hoax. So what are the shapes of UFOs? So, okay, we have the one in France, for instance, that's what we can call kind of cigar shape. We have the saucer shape, and also we have this one at the bottom right, that's the triangle shape. These seem to be like the more commonly encountered, but there are many others. Like for instance, on top here we have the octahedron, almost like 2 pyramids, one inverted, one upright. We have what looks like a diamond. We have the sphere. Now, that's where I'm going to get to something that was put together by Houston MUFON. So what they did is that they tried to catalog the shapes of UFOs. Now, obviously, there are a lot, maybe more than that, but these are among the most commonly encountered. So we have triangle, cigar. Excuse the the drawing, not necessarily the best given the shape, but we have cylinder. Sometimes the cigar and the cylindrical are both referred to as cigar shape. There's some rocket bullet shape. There's a boomerang. There's a kind of a bird shape, elliptical, spherical. Even though this one doesn't appear like a sphere, but yeah, we have a spherical. And then there are other types as well, as you can see. Now, what they did also in the Houston MUFON is that they took a variety of shapes and they classified them into categories so that they can refer to them easily whenever there's a sighting. Like for instance, here you have number, let's say A, letter A, you have these shapes, and then they put numbers 1 through 10, and then B, same thing. Not that necessarily the UFOs in one group are alike. You could see some differences, obviously, sometimes triangle. But they made this classification, and then if you want to refer, let's say, to this particular UFO here, you will say, well, it's E3, for instance, or this one will be F3, or this one will be F5. And then they looked at actual sightings reported to MUFON, and they identified 80 that have these shapes, and they gave them these codes. So now they refer to them as E8, F8, whatever, L1, and so on. Based on actual sightings. And then among what they found to be the more commonly reported are the saucer shape, flat top, they call it straw hat, or the double hat, the conical sphere, Saturn-like. There's the elliptical, cylindrical, dirigible, and also there's a triangular or boomerang. Now, again, there's, on openminds.tv, it's a site that actually gathers a lot of information. They put them there, and, they reference things. And here, for instance, we find many types, and we could see where they were seen, like in Brazil, for instance. Sometimes, we have like this one, the one at the bottom, a wing cylindrical shape. That could be easily confused, for instance, for an airplane. But the size of some of them are, are huge, that just can't be airplane. That's a continuity of it. That's another one. So you could see numerous, and we see in New Zealand, for instance, in Yorkshire, and so on. Now here, one of the things I want to actually mention, the top left here, this one actually was seen by US pilots in B-52, if I can, well, yes, and it was in B-52 in above Vietnam, and they actually described that to be a 1/4 of a mile diameter, for instance, and so on. And then there's in the center, you can see, for instance, the Houston one in Houston Valley on top, and at the bottom we have the Phoenix. I think that's the one that was dubbed the Phoenix light. And then to the right, again, not everything was taken with an actual camera, so some of them were drawn. So now I'm gonna take a little bit from Earth to Mars and beyond. So we saw some, images about UFOs long ago and recently. Well, if we have alien visitors, did they leave anything behind? Now, what I'm about to show can reflect a few things. One, it can reflect that the aliens, ancient extraterrestrials, came to Earth and built certain things. Or it can reflect that, well, they brought humans here, they jumpstart the civilization, they gave them some technology to build things with it. Or it can be a mix of both. Okay. Also, what's intriguing is that we could see in many parts of on Earth, for instance, we have ancient sites that look very similar, even though they're in different parts of the world and they're thousands of years old. So again, it's suggestive of a common civilization. Sometimes it's called the ancient civilization or the ancient builders, whatever that is. One of the theories, for instance, is that they came out of Atlantis, for instance. Another one is that no, maybe there was something about the ancient type of building shared by different civilizations, and that's why they built them. Again, either or, it involves technology to build these. It involves things that we even can't do today, and definitely it reflects the presence of civilization long before we think it is, based on accepted theories. So let's start on Earth first and on land. First, we have pyramids. We're all familiar with the pyramids. And also there's something that's called the triptych temples. So basically these are temples. What's peculiar about them is that they have 3 doors or windows, usually mostly doors. And oftentimes the central door is larger. Oftentimes they are a bit trapezoid. Sometimes we can see it clearly, sometimes not. And you can see here in Mexico, Egypt, Indonesia, for instance. And then there's also the corbel arches that are common, and then we see mummification also in very much the distant locations, Mexico, Egypt, Indonesia. These are depiction forms of Maya temples with those triptych temples, 3 doors or 3 windows that many of them appear trapezoid. And then we have the depiction of, again, this one is the exact trapezoid. And then we have some what looks like habits of creating those masks, those gold masks that also in distant civilizations between Incan and Egyptian, for instance. Again, Incan, pre-Inca, and Egyptian step pyramids. And then we have the elongated skulls. Now, of course, when we talk about elongated skulls, one has to be a bit careful because we know that in several parts of the world, especially in Africa, for instance, they practice binding the skull of babies to elongate it. But then when you ask them why, what's the rationale behind it, many of them would say that they want them to look like the gods. Now, who were the gods or the ancient gods? Again, one could realize that those who came long ago, if the extraterrestrials came, they are flying, they have there's what they call flying chariot, for instance, their spaceships. Maybe some of them had elongated skull. And for instance, in Egypt, there's Akhenaten. Akhenaten is depicted with what looks like an elongated skull, right? So he didn't really have the binding for it. So that's basically, something that's related to what we see today in the gray aliens. Like, for instance, many of the, the grays we know that they have this big head, but also it's elongated as well. So it could be related to extraterrestrial civilizations that just have different shapes of heads than we do, basically. The masks again. Then there are these, buildings, if you can call them like this, and they're made of huge stones that are put together, so tightly, can't even insert a pin between them. And usually when they are in this shape, they are resistant to earthquakes, for instance. Again, we see the trapezoid doors. And then we have the obelisk, for instance. Today, when you want to build an obelisk, a big one, we use hundreds of small stones to make it, while all these ancient ones were giant, built from one piece of rock, for instance, and then there's carving on it on top of that. Again, this requires technology. You can't just chisel that out, let alone when they transport them from one place to another to set them. Again, some other buildings, especially this that are a bit bent inwards, they tend to resist to earthquakes. Then you have those giant statues that we find, especially a lot of them in Egypt, for instance, all built of one giant rock. Again, even today, we have a hard time making these. Sometimes in Egypt, you have like an entire temple in the rock. Something also common between Incas and Egyptians, we see these structures that, it's like a typical for the way of construction. They have like small columns, and on top of them, they have those horizontal stones and more columns and so on. And sometimes when we see entire temples, they look like that. And then we have depiction of people who are flying. Now, again, remember in the ancient times, they usually depict what they see. So they saw someone flying. Now, did they see a person flying, or did they see him in a flying machine, a flying device, like we call today a spaceship? That remains to be determined, but they definitely saw something or someone flying. And then when you look, for instance, in Easter Islands, we have the moai, those basically statues that are looking inwards. Now, some of them weigh 30, 40 tons, some of them go up to 90 tons. Now, nobody really knows who built them. Like when you ask the indigenous people, they say, well, they were there before our time, but then the story they have that's passed on is that they saw them flying to their ahu, or to the base where they're at. Now, if we look at it today, can a stone fly on its own? No. So how could this happen? Well, maybe they were moved by some anti-gravity technology, for instance. And then what's one of the very intriguing is in Lebanon, there is the Temple of Jupiter in Baalbek. It has at the base 3 giant rocks, and these are called the trilithon. They're estimated to be each between 1,200 and 2,000, 1,200 to 2,000 ton each. Roughly, maybe that these up to 1,800. For one, how did they cut them? How did they move them to put them here? Like even today, if I try to move like 1,200 or 1,800 ton rock, we need like so many cranes, and we can't even move it after that. Maybe we'll lift it barely. Right. And then there is another one, a fourth one that's cut, but it's still partially attached to the rock. So it's even heavier than these, estimated to be like maybe 2.2 thousand tons and so on. Now, what is the theory behind that? Now, even though this is supposed to be a Roman temple, but really those are rocks here. This is what was added by the Romans, the columns and so on. We don't really have any evidence that the Romans built that, even though we have Roman ruins all over the world, or at least in many places, they say. But we don't really have evidence that the Romans who were on horseback had the technology to build these. So either they were given the technology by some, or these were just built long before, and the Romans just occupied them and used them. One theory for why you need such a big base of stone is that it was a spaceport, and then they need a solid base for some sort of ship to land on it, for instance. And then we have, some artifacts where you see this peculiar shape that just looks like a spiral galaxy, for instance. And then remember I mentioned the DNA earlier. I said, remember how it looks like a double helix, how the RNA looks singular. So we see depictions that looks just like a single-stranded DNA or like an RNA, but they are in the form of a snake, except that it's always in that same shape. And again, we see it here on other things from Egypt. We see it in the Inca, pre-Inca. Again, what would wonder? Well, maybe they were telling us something, that there's a hybridization going on, and this is one strand of DNA of one species and then of another species. Again, it's a theory, could be something completely different. And then we have the pyramids. Now, we're probably all familiar with the pyramids of Giza and the Sphinx, but there are actually a lot of pyramids in so many different countries. Like, for instance, of course, in Mexico, we're familiar with that, such as in Teotihuacan, for instance. There's in Cambodia, Angkor Wat, even though it's not a typical pyramid that we would expect in Egypt. And then in India, we have some. And then there's a Bosnian pyramid, actually. And then in China, there are several hundreds of pyramids, except that the Chinese government covers most of them with grass to kind of camouflage them a little bit. But then there's this pyramid here that was called the White Pyramid, and so on. So I looked to see what countries have confirmed pyramids were discovered, and I came up with this list. So there are plenty, actually, of countries, not just in South America and Central America and in Giza and China. So there are many others. Okay, we've gone over that on the top and at the bottom. Look at this temple, for instance, carved in rock, how big it is. Again, all this necessitated technology. We can't just chisel that. Again, we've talked about that. Okay, now here's the Baghdad battery. Here are some actual ones, for instance. And then to the right side, actually in the ancient texts like the Mahabharata and other texts, you see descriptions of what they refer to as the Vimanas, and they describe them as flying machines. And actually they categorize them into many different types. And some of them, the more common types, are a saucer shape, a cigar shape, and this one that looks like a cone shape, for instance. I'm trying to get a copy of it, of the details of their construction, but based on available information, they have descriptions of how to construct these. Then we have more images. Okay, we've seen maybe some of these earlier. However, if you look at the bottom, for instance, in Australia, there's some Wangina petroglyphs. It looks like someone wearing a spacesuit. And again, in Colombia, we have small statues for the same thing. In Sumeria, we have what looks like someone who has a very strange head that doesn't look like us, basically. And then again, if you look on the top here, also Sumerian. Now, something about the Sumerian is that there are a lot of Sumerian tablets were discovered, and they were translated by Zachariah Sitchin. Now, these, they tell a story about the Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki, they're believed to be people who used to live on a planet called Nibiru. And it was, very distant. And then somehow there was a war, a galactic war, and then their atmosphere got damaged. They could not live on the surface. So they escaped to the inside of their planet. And somehow they managed to convert their planet into a kind of a spaceship, but it's a planet. And they put an orbit that is 3,600 years. And that's sometimes referred to as the 12th planet. Now, according to that theory as well, is that 500,000 years ago, they came to Earth, they found that there's a lot of gold on Earth, and they mined that gold. And that initially they were mining it themselves, then they realized it's too hard for them to do on their own. So what they did is that they took whatever human or humanoid, I should say, was on Earth, hybridized it with their DNA, because apparently they found that on Earth, and those who they found them here were not maybe smart enough to do the job. And then they created supposedly a slave species. Now, here I have to combine that story with other stories in ancient texts. You see in different parts of the world a similar story. But then there is also one story that talks about Atlantis. And again, I know the topic of Atlantis is very controversial, but according to some of these, is that the Anunnaki, when they created the so-called slave species, they, at some point they created the city or the continent that became Atlantis. I'm not going to go into details because also there are like some variants I would have to discuss. But again, it seems that Atlantis eventually developed a lot. And they stopped accepting to be slaves for the Anunnaki and so on. Eventually, they would attack. Atlantis sank. Before it sank, they distributed their their technology in different parts of the world. We'll talk about this there. Then we have in Mexico, for instance, we see those stones with depictions of what we can tell as some sort of flying saucer and some beam, either taking someone up or bringing it down. Also, more Wangina cave paintings in Australia. Then there's the famous Nazca lines. Now, the Nazca lines, they're not necessarily something fancy per se. The sand here, the stock color, if you make a streak, if you scratch it basically underneath it's white, you get a Nazca line. But what's interesting, so on the top left is just a depiction of them, but in the bottom right, that's when you see a picture of them from sky. They seem to be mostly all connected. We have long lines, but they have shapes that cannot just be built unless you're somehow hovering up to be able to see how to build them. And probably you need some more so technology, not just a regular chisel to make them with this precision. Again, who built them? Nobody knows. Who created them. And then we have stone structures in many parts of the world. Maybe one of the most famous that we're all familiar with is the Stonehenge in England. Different theories have been put about it, going from producing some energy, some free energy. It could be a transporter, an advanced transporter that we just don't understand. It can transport between different planets or different dimensions. More recently, we hear stories about people who will sit there for 5 minutes, and then when they leave, they discover that 30 minutes passed or 2 hours passed, or they sit there for 30 minutes or 2 hours, and then they discover that 2 days have passed, as if there's some sort of time distortion happening, but it's not happening necessarily all the time. Again, and these were brought from like 200 kilometers away, these stones. Again, they needed something to, transport them. And then we have the Carnac stones in France, and these are almost 3 kilometers long, and they are placed in what doesn't look like a random thing, except that who put them there? Why did they put them? They weigh many, many tons each. That's another thing. Then I'll move on now a little bit to some evidence underwater. What do we have underwater? Well, for instance, off of Cuba, there was some sort of a city that was discovered, and actually during the Cold War, the US want to make sure this remains hidden from the Soviets, so they don't go and explore it. And again, some of the stories is that there were some objects that they were able to move. Was it like some sunken or some spaceships that are still active? It's not sure, but that's how it looks like. And then there's the crystal pyramids in Bermuda Triangle. Again, when these were discovered, a lot of jokes were made about them. It's like, how can you have glass pyramids at the bottom of the ocean and so on? However, whatever they are made of, they look like crystal. Again, if you're an advanced civilization, you can have a resonant crystal. But what's curious is that they are shined. You can feel as if light is coming out of them, and the water around them is lit as well. So that's another picture. And then pyramids near Portugal was also discovered. There was like some pyramid off of Portugal. So again, we have these. The question here is that were they built underwater or were they built before there was water in that area? But those built at the bottom of the ocean, well, how exactly? Did we have a time where there was no water and then they were built, and then after that water was added to Earth? Again, interesting questions. There's a Yonaguni monument in Japan as well, which is this one as well. And then Cleopatra Palace. Now, Cleopatra Palace was built on land. It eventually became underwater. But look at how it is built, like the details in the huge structures. Again, this cannot be just chiseled. Now, we're gonna look a little bit at some evidence in space. All right, outside Earth. First, we have the famous face on Mars, or the head sometimes. Again, it really looks like an artificial structure. Then the place where this is found is called the City of the Face. And there are so many structures. Many of them are like pyramids. We have 4-sided, 5-sided pyramids, sometimes 3-sided pyramids, and there are many of them, and they're huge compared to what we have on Earth. More recently, by Curiosity rover, for instance, there's a pyramid. Another pyramid was discovered. Also, there's a couple of pyramids. Actually, I think I might have seen a third one, but at least in one image, you see this pyramid, and then after the right, there's another pyramid. And then again, one might say it's a mountain, but the way they look is a bit more structured. But anyway, however, let's look at the, in the front, there's this also what looks like a sphinx, and it does look like a sphinx with paws and maybe some temple. And then there's these pictures. Actually, something about these is that I like to collect pictures whenever I found them on center size. Sometimes I found them in an article, for instance. Unfortunately, back then I thought they're going to be there forever. I didn't take the article to keep the reference. Recently, I tried to look for this particular one here, those two on the right. I couldn't find them. Okay, but the ones on the left, I could still find them. And these are also taken from Mars. And then there's the famous tubes on Mars. Again, this has been also ridiculed for a while, but actually you could see that these are not just like some random things, almost like a translucent tube system. And you will see sometimes a light inside, and sometimes you see it in different locations. Sometimes you don't see it at all. So as if it's some sort of transportation system. Again, if this is what we think it is, then there's someone living on Mars and probably underground, and this is their transportation system. Again, these are there. Something that also caught my attention, which could be actually also interesting, is that if you look at this picture here, this is like from recent rover missions on Mars. So these look like rocks, like not like really dried out mud. They look like rocks. And if you look here on the right side, I think it's the same thing. Now, this looks to me similar to, in the old towns where the ground we pave it with some slabs of rocks or stones that are different shapes and so on. This looks almost like that. I'm not going to say that all over Mars is like this. Some of them could be dried out mud, but some of them, look like stones. So again, you need to have someone to build this. That's not a natural formation. And then we have on the moon, for instance, there was the Soviet moon probe detected what they called back then the Tower of Babel. It was actually, I think, at least more than a kilometer high. And there's not a picture, but it was blurred out. And then there's this, what looks like a city on the moon again. That's also curious. And then there is actually Dr. Ken Johnston. He has a collection of images that he was able to obtain from someone at NASA, images that were not published, but they were from Apollo missions. We could see what looks like towers. We could see these that look like artificial structures in different places. This one that has personally, I don't like to call them craters, because a crater really will look different. We'll have a bottom that's different, not a flat bottom, completely flat or with lines and so on, or some what looks like artificial structures. Then on Phobos, the moon of Mars, also we have a tower. We have another one on Ceres, a pyramid on Ceres. So all these basically tell us, okay, well, we didn't build these, right? Who built them? We might be able to doubt some of them, say, well, no, we're probably assuming it's a pyramid, but it's not a pyramid, it's a mountain, right? We could do that with some, but then there's so many that, you get to say, and they are very similar to something we have on Earth as well. So somehow the civilization that probably passed by Mars first, then came to Earth, maybe. And then we have this so-called pyramid code. Now, what's the pyramid code? Now, this is Orion, this is the constellation Orion, and then the Orion belt has 3 stars, and then the 3rd star is a little bit off to the side, basically. Now, we have something on Earth that depicts just that. Like if you look in the Great Pyramids of Giza, 2 pyramids and the 3rd a little bit off. Then in Mexico, in Teotihuacan pyramids, 2, and then the 3rd a little bit off. And then the Chilean pyramids in China, 2, and then the 3rd is a little bit off. And then when you look at where these countries or these pyramids are located, you see that also they form the same pattern. The 3rd one, the 3rd side is a little bit off as well, just like the stars of the Orion belt. And now something about that is that, okay, well, they look a little bit at the angle here and the angle that we saw currently in Orion belt, and then it doesn't match. So some people in ufology, they developed some software that can predict, kind of study the movement of the constellations, and then predict how it's going to be a few years or a number of years in the future, or back how they used to be before. And they were able to see that when you go back to 10,500 BC, the angle of this is very similar to the angle of what we have in Egypt in the Giza pyramids. So that's one of the reasons there are hypotheses that the Giza pyramids were built 10,500 BC. Somehow they want us to know that. And then the Great Pyramid in Giza has so many things that it's not really a tomb to begin with. No one was buried in it. Different hypotheses about it, but the way it's built inside is more of an engineered structure, like some sort of a machine. The granite that's there, for instance, brought from very long distance, and so on. And then you have those shafts that point to certain stars, for instance. Again, one of the theories is that it could generate free energy. Another theory is that it could be a landing site for flying for like some spaceships. Now, does this really make sense? Probably. If you have a machine that generates free energy, today we have chargers for cell phones. You just put your cell phone on it and it charges wirelessly. You don't have to plug it. So if they were using a similar system, just different technology, then maybe, yeah, a ship can come and sit on it and charge from it, for example. Again, that's one of the possibilities. Now, we have other things in the solar system that are also curious, like for instance, something about Saturn. Saturn's earring, so this basically is something that was depicted in the book of Norman Bergram in his book Ringmakers of Saturn. So he noted that in the early 1980s, the A-ring was incomplete as opposed to later. It's almost like it was been built over time. Then also we have findings by the SETI Institute, for instance, and things from the Cassini probe. Like for instance, in the SETI, they noticed that between 2004 and 2009, the Saturn most distant ring was twice as bright and 3 times as wide as it was during the Voyager flyby in 1980s. And then the Prometheus closest approach to the F ring was 500 kilometers in early 1980s and 200 kilometers in 2009. So if this is a natural satellite, why does it change distance so much in very little time? And then the Saturn moons Atlas, Daphne, Pan, Pandora, and Epimetheus, they seem to scoop up material. Actually, that was shown by the Cassini probe, that they scoop up material from the inner ring space, almost like they cleaned them up to keep them in good shape or something. Again, that seems to be something artificial more so than something natural. And then again, there are some more findings that were found. But one of the interesting finds is that the rings were estimated to be much younger than the planet itself, like about 100 million years, as opposed to billions of years for the planet. So they're more of a recent addition. Now, the author, Norman Bergram, in his book, he examined some pictures of the rings, and he considers that this is here some sort of a giant spaceship building the rings. He considers this to be an exhaust. He finds that there's some lights. He discovers some anomalies, for instance, like spokes and some irregular features in the Saturn rings. Now, let's look at Saturn moons. Now here, it also gets even more interesting. Now, you probably all know this to the top left, the Death Star from Star Wars. However, actually they inspired that from the moon Iaptus, the moon of Saturn, which looks exactly like that. And if you look at the center, there's a ridge. And if you look at close up, it's almost like 2 half spheres that were brought together. Again, that doesn't seem to be natural. Unfortunately, I couldn't, find the image again on time. There's an image where Iaptus is actually seen with some light behind it, and you can see that it's not a circular; it's actually polygonal. So that the edges are polygonal, which even makes it more geometric. And here we can see the ridges a bit closer. And then I was curious to see if there are any other satellites that look like that. And I found that Mimas and Tethys, they have the same thing. Now, that's a bit far from coincidence. What is this? They seem to have this same, what I have to call some opening, right? And then Pandora and Tellisto, they have also some curious openings, which is, again, what are these, basically? And then we have other moons that look a little bit like this one looks like a flying saucer. This one looks like a kind of an elongated UFO, this one as well. And then NASA calls these moons ring-shaping moons, Epimetheus, Pan, Pandora, Daphne, and Atlas. And then someone from SETI, sorry, I forgot the name, but the research from SETI noted how this particular moon, as it's passing, it causes some waves, which eventually they will go away. So kind of disrupts them a little bit. So that is. Then I looked at some moons of Jupiter, and I also found some similarity. Some moons, they like TB and Amalthea, they look a little bit like something we see with the Saturn moon. Again, are these artificial structures that, some of what they do with the rings, well, suggest like so. Some of them, they shape like Iaptus, for instance. And then I looked a little bit at the Kuiper belt, and I found this one, which is the MS4 object, which looks very similar to Iaptus. Now, if you see one of those, it's one thing, but then you see many of them, and they have the same, and this one has the same ridge at the center as well. So that's far from being a coincidence. So somehow, these seem to be probably artificial. Again, I personally like stated, with my theory I mentioned earlier that solar system or the universe was somehow engineered. Seeing these, for instance, will confirm a little bit some of that. And then NASA was, as you probably know, studying also the sound of planets, how they sound like. And they found that using the Van Allen probes, the sound of Earth was similar to the sound of whales. Again, is this a coincidence or is it by engineering, basically to tell, okay, there's some marine life here, basically. And then there's some UFOs spotted on the sun. Actually, I was able to see the video for this. I didn't have to look for it again, but I took that snapshot. So you see here like a huge tail, if you want, and then this big, whatever it is. And then after a while, you see that this, what looks like a tail, detaching and the whole thing zapping away. So again, if you're advanced enough, can you tolerate the heat of the sun? Probably. And then sometimes we see other things that don't look like solar ejections, something probably artificial. And now, how about some radio signals that are detected? Again, talk about aliens, looking for them, hearing them maybe, and so on. Now, again, so far, radio signals have not been considered definitely to be coming from aliens, but there were like many discovered. Like, for instance, there's in the Big Ear in Ohio State University, there's the WOW signal. Unfortunately, it wasn't heard again. Nikola Tesla once mentioned that he heard signals coming from, he believes, coming from Mars. Actually, that's why he was ridiculed at the time. But then, of course, we know that his discoveries, were so major that, despite they ridiculed him, but he electrified the world and so on. And then we have the Green Bank telescope in West Virginia also detected some bursts. And then China Large Telescope has been detecting some bursts as well. How about other forms of communication? Well, in 1974, Sagan and Drake sent a message from the Arecibo Observatory. They were basically sending a message, to whoever might be listening there. They targeted the M13. M13 is a group, a cluster of stars that is roughly 25,000 light years away. But it was very, like, almost in sight at the time. Now they send this message. What you're seeing here in the images is the same image, but just mirror image to one another. So on top, they depict the numbers we have 1 to 10, then the atomic numbers of the basic chemicals of life on Earth, like carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, and phosphorus. Then there's the formula of the building blocks of DNA. And then here they depict the size of the DNA of humans. It's the DNA shape. And then we have this that depicts how the human is and approximate size. And this was in binary code sent. And then we have at the bottom, this is depicting the sun, and then we have the planets here. So the third planet, which is Earth, is put off to the side to reflect that that's where we are. Now, 23 years later, in 2001, there were these two that appeared in the crowds. Again, a lot of ridicule, a lot of stories that these are hoaxes. But if you look to see what, like, at least this one is, so to the left is the one that was received, to the right is the one we sent. So what do we have here? So the one we received, well, the numbering system is the same. Then we have, they have carbon and silicon as being dominant. And then we look at the DNA, they seem to have an extra DNA strand. And then that's the depiction of them. They're about 4 feet tall, bigger head. Again, that seems to be a bit more similar to the gray aliens that we see encountered. And then they are inhabiting the second, third, and fourth star of their, fourth planet of their star. And they have a much bigger instrument compared to our telescope. Then there's the crop circles. Again, crop circles being ridiculed a lot, especially after having a lot of people coming out to say that they faked them, and they, we all saw this on YouTube, how some people take some wooden board and they step on the on the grass. Now, that said, however, also in MUFON we have that in our manual, how to distinguish between a crop circle that was made by the hoaxers and crop circles that were made by something else. The hoaxers, if you look at the bottom, you see they're sloppy, they're broken. Look at this one, they're trying to make it like almost perpendicular or whatever it is, but you can see how they're damaged. While a genuine crop circle that was not claimed by any hoaxers, you see all the stems are like swirling clockwise and counterclockwise, sometimes in layers, and nothing is broken. Now, more importantly, from up high in the air, you might not see a difference, but when you get closer, look what you see. For instance, there is we have the elongation of the node, and then it appears to be bent. So it's not broken, it's somehow heated, elongated, and then bent. And then we have what we call the expulsion cavities. Expulsion cavities is caused by excessive heat on the inside as well. This we don't see when the hoaxers make some crop circles. And then again, these are some more depictions of how they are bent rather than broken, and then have the expulsion cavities. So you see that in a crop circle, that's a bona fide for a crop circle that was not made by hoaxers. Now, who made them? Okay, well, there were some cases where people would be, when they see that there are crop circles forming in their fields, they will wait at night to see what's going to happen. And at least, a few instances, there were one instance they were filming, and then they see a flash of light at night. And then no one went in, just a flash of light. They went there and there was a crop circle forming. Another time, some people were in a field, they heard a buzzing noise, they looked around, and bam, a crop circle formed. So they're being formed. Now, again, were they formed by UFOs? Were they formed by interdimensional beings? If they are natural, why are they so geometric, for instance? Why are they so, it's hard to believe that nature is going to draw something that precise, for instance. And then also we have this one, the first one is about 238 meters. It's in England. Another one, this one is 600 foot long, for instance, and there are others. Then there was this one that appeared. So I forgot to put the date and location. This is depicting the head of a gray alien, or what looks like a gray alien. And then here, this was found to be binary code, loosely translating into beware of bearers of false gifts and broken promises, much pain, but still time. There's good out there. We oppose deceivers, conduit closing. Again, so did they send that message, basically? Some from extraterrestrialization, and that's a good question. Then we have abductions. Okay, so why do we have abductions? Why is it possible that so many people have reported abductions? By the way, so it's not just one person. It's not a theory. It's people coming, and then many of them get submitted to hypnosis, and they will tell details. Sometimes people unrelated. Sometimes a group of people together, and then under hypnosis they tell the same story, even though they are hypnotized at different or independently, I should say. So of course, could be to make contact, could be to study life on Earth, human life, maybe experiments, genetic harvest, hybridization. A lot of the abductees, they basically claim that both sperm and ova has been taken from them, sometimes repeatedly. Sometimes women would say that they were pregnant one minute, and then the next they're not pregnant. And when they under hypnosis, they remember that they were taken somewhere and then saw these, what they look like, gray aliens. Now, again, the gray aliens are not the only ones, by the way. I'm mentioning that because this happens to be among the common ones, but it could be a different time. There are like many different other species that have been seen. Some of them are tall, white, like almost milk white. Some of them, they look almost glowy, orange, red. There's heat about them when they're around you. Like the temperature of the room is almost 10 degrees higher, and so on. Could be to place implants. Again, there are many abductees who claim they have some implants on X-ray. We see some metallic things that are in different places in their body, and under the base of the skull or different other places. Maybe it's also for communication, maybe also for healing. Actually, many people also mentioned that after being either visited or abducted, that somehow they they had some disease, for instance, and the disease went away. Like, for instance, someone, a lady, I apologize for not putting that here with the exact location, but she had cancer. She was sleeping in her bed, and then somehow she saw like some sort of a small disc-shaped object, very small, going into her room. There was some gas being released, so what looks like gas, all over the room. and then the object left. The gas stayed there for a while. The next day she was feeling better. Eventually she got tested and the cancer was gone. Again, there could be something of that sort. And also maybe it's about giving knowledge or technology or teaching. We hear here and there some people who would say that they had let's say, a dream of an ancient Indian god or goddess, giving them an equation, a mathematical equation. And again, for instance, you have Da Vinci. Da Vinci, before he started, making all these amazing, if you want, the inventions or discoveries and so on, he went into a cave. He was lost for a couple of years somehow, and then he came back, and that's when he was, doing all these things and putting the inventions. Again, it's possible that he somehow either was maybe taken or maybe went into some other dimension, saw something, came to report it, or knowledge was passed down to him. We don't know. And then as an example of famous abductions, there's Betty and Barney Hill, which kind of opened up, if you want, the modern era of abductions. They were going back home. They thought they're going to be back at 2 or 3 a.m., but they arrived like almost 2 3 hours later. Under hypnosis, they described how they were taken. They saw actually a spaceship. They could see what looks like window, and they could see individuals there. And then they were inside. And then also some samples were taken from them. Then we have the Allagash abduction. This also became a famous incident. And this one basically, it happened for 4 friends. They were going camping there. And then at some point they decided to go on a lake a little bit. And then they put a big fire, really, really big fire that should last for a number of hours. And they went on their boat, and then they saw a light in the sky that they had seen the day before. It was dark, so they signaled it with a flashlight. They wanted to see if it's going to react, and it reacted. It immediately came towards them. So they tried to escape, basically. They didn't want to stay in the lake. They wanted to just run away. But then the next thing they remember is that they are on the shore, and the fire is almost gone. And they put a fire that's supposed to last a few hours. They were exhausted, tired, didn't talk about it, continued their trip. But then they started having these dreams about being somewhere, seeing each other in a room, seeing those what looks like gray aliens and so on. And then they got under hypnosis. They all told the same thing, that they were actually taken by this ship and then they were examined. Samples were taken from them one after the other. Then they were brought back and put back on their boat and pushed towards the shore. So there's some also curious observations that we see in space. Like, for instance, there's the Tabby star, KRC A462852, which dims regularly. Of course, that could be a variety of things. But one of the hypotheses in ufology is that it could be some artificial structure around it, maybe to take energy from it or generate power. Then here at the bottom, I'm going to actually have to read that. So basically, it's a scientist from SETI, James Benford, who talked about this orbital objects, that they can be alien probes. Basically, the asteroid 2016 HO3 has an orbit around the sun that keeps it at a constant or as a constant companion to Earth. Again, is this a coincidence, or is it some alien probe that looks on the outside like a rock? Oh, and of course, some bacteria or plankton have been found growing on the outside of the International Space Station. Now, of course, International Space Station is in kind of low orbit; it's not that high, but still, in a harsh environment, having things growing also would give an idea that life can actually be transmitted also in the space. Then this is actually something that gets more into if you heard of Edgar Cayce and Atlantis. I mentioned Atlantis earlier. Now, one of the aspect of the story of Atlantis that somehow they knew they're gonna be something's gonna happen. Now, one of the stories that they just their technology went wrong and destroyed the continent. But another story, like I mentioned earlier, is that they were attacked somehow by the Anunnaki. Now, excuse me, I need to take voice drop. My voice sometimes disappear a little bit. So Edgar Cayce spoke. Now he was known as a sleeping prophet. Now, it's not really a prophet, and he's not a psychic, even though sometimes it's called a psychic. He used to put himself in a in a trance, if you're on state of trance, and then you ask him a question, then he can give you detailed answers. And this is confirmed actually because someone near him will write down what he is saying. When he wakes up, he doesn't remember anything. But then he will diagnose diseases, for instance, and he will give the treatment for it. If you do exactly what he says, the person is cured. They asked him, he predicted the World War. He said back then, unless there's a divine intervention, the entire world is going to be set on fire. And it happened World War II. Someone asked him about the stock market, how it's going to be. He said it's going to crash, pull your money away. And then, there was a Great Depression and so on. So he mentioned that the place where he gets his information is from the Akashic records, that there's some place in the universe where all the knowledge is stored and anyone can access it, because we are all, after all, energy. And if we know how to tap into different energies, we could access that. And according to him, the Atlanteans placed what he calls Hall of Records in 3 different locations: on the right paw of the Sphinx in Egypt, in the Bimini, and somewhere in the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, aside from that, there was what's known as the Metal Library, or the Crystal Library. Now, this one is a guy called Petronio Jaramillo, long ago in the 1950s, 1960s, when he was, or a bit earlier actually, when he was in his teens, he went into a water that's at this area, and he saw an opening, like a tunnel underwater. He went into it, he went up from the other side, and he was inside a cave system. Now, he described it to have many rooms, some rooms with gold books are made of gold sheets or silver sheets, others crystal, and so on. And then this ended up being known as the Metal Library or Crystal Library. Now, however, there's someone called Father Crespi. He was in this, he's in Ecuador. He helped the natives there. He never asked anything from them. So they bring him gifts, but all their gifts look something like this, basically. Sometimes statues, sometimes drawings, and so on. They all covered, mostly gold, but sometimes silver as well. After he died, all of these disappeared. Now, no one was able to, someone took a picture, I think, of, was it this, probably this one, or one of the, let's say, those sheets, and they tried to translate it, and they give it to different people, and they came up with different translations. So really, no one knows the language of it. But again, this could be, if it is true, it could be a repository also of some ancient civilization that put it there, waiting for us to discover it. So where do UFOs come from? Well, they can come from other bodies or planets in the solar system. They can come from other star systems, other galaxies. Of course, we have the multiverse theory. Many universes can be from other universes, other dimensions, other times as well. It doesn't have to be one place, could be from many. So then how do they travel through the vast of the universe? So one of the criticism that we receive in the ufology is that, well, if there are hundreds of light years away or thousands or more, well, how can they just come here, right? If you think of travel by the technology we have today, well, you might think this is not possible. But again, remember I mentioned earlier that the universe has been around for at least, X number of billion years. If a civilization appeared at that time, they had many billions of years head start on us. So they could develop and become much more advanced. And yes, they could cover distances, much faster. Now, some of the theories that we have is the warp drive. Now, how does the warp drive or warp speed work? It's basically, it squeezes the space from one end and it stretches it from another end, almost like you have a ball with two let's say cables in it. You pull the cables behind it out, it pushes it forward faster. So it doesn't necessarily travel at an actual speed. So we call it the apparent speed of light. So for instance, at warp 10, it's estimated that could be like 10,000 times the speed of light, but not the actual speed. It's more like you can get from point A to point B in a certain amount of time that would reflect that particular speed, but without really being at that speed, because you're warping space-time. And then hyperspace drive is believed that this would allow to go outside the actual space and not being influenced by the regular laws of physics. Again, it's complicated to see how this would be, but that's another way, and then you can get faster. Then there's a wormhole. Wormhole was also hypothesized by Einstein, and basically this one considers that you can somehow bend the space-time and bring two ends to, that are very far in space, bring them closer, and then make a connection between them and pass through it. Black holes have been hypothesized many times that they could create basically a rip in space-time, and then you could travel through it. Personally, I think that this is very also possible, because when you have the black hole, it tends to be viewed as a destructive force, but in reality, if you think of it, the gravity of the black hole creates the rip in the middle, the rip in space-time. Now, inside that rip, you don't have the influence of the gravity. You're in the middle of it, so the gravity is on the periphery, extending a little bit maybe to the center, but the very center is likely you don't have that influence, almost like the eye of the hurricane kind of, and it could connect different places. Of course, could think other means. Now, speaking of traveling faster than speed of light, well, even though Einstein wasn't sure we can go above the speed of light, however, at the time, Tesla demonstrated that in one of his calculations that you can travel much faster. In one calculation, he showed that you can go as fast as 50 times the speed of light. And at the time, Einstein eventually called him to congratulate him for that. So I'm going to end this talk with a few sightings of California MUFON. This is in case 118076, a triangular shaped lights, 3 lights in a perfect triangle were seen in La Onda, California. They were moving, but they were maintaining this triangular shape. There is in case 116878 in Folsom, Sacramento. This object is an elongated shaped object, very, very glowy, that was also seen traveling at a relatively slow speed. This one was actually, it's a snapshot from a video. If you see here, this is a UFO that has 4 lights. It actually comes from this end and then goes in front of the car and keeps going relatively slowly, and then eventually it heads this way. And it has like 4 lights, but the 4th is a bit, now we don't see it well because it's a bit far in front of the car. This was in Fresno, California. It's kind of triangle, it's not the perfect triangle, but it's a little bit bumpy in the front. And this one actually is very curious. There's a video for it and there are images. So it's what looks like a disc. Actually, you know, if you didn't see the video, you might say it's a fake, because it looks like a almost some sort of, you know, circular candy, or what do you call them? Pancake maybe, but it is actually moving slowly. And then what you see here is a tree, so it goes behind the tree, and then that's like a branch of a tree basically. It just looks like a disc. This is in Alameda, California. It's a disc shape. And then in Long Beach, Los Angeles, someone saw a UFO that looks like this. He didn't have an image of it. He sent us a Natus rendition. Basically, he said it looks just like a boomerang shape. And then in March 2019 in Sonoma, California, this object was seen. It looks a lot like the one seen in France, above France in last November, but this one wasn't orange, at least, was like a light, but it's a cigar-shaped object as well. And then in June 2018 in Yosemite National Park, I think it was a family there, and then they saw this object, they took a picture of it. It's a disc-shaped object. You can see a dome on top and maybe a smaller one on the bottom as well. And then this one is actually an interesting one as well. So the witness saw this object, and there was a cloud, a cloud that is, you know, you can see very small, you know, to say that, well, the object could have hidden there and then we just can't see it. Even if the object goes in and changes direction, we're going to see it exiting from one place or the other. What he saw is that the object moved and then entered the cloud and never been seen again. He didn't see it exiting from any direction. Again, there are a lot of, you know, we hear many times people associate a UFO with a cloud. So maybe they form a cloud around themselves to hide, or also it could be a portal, again, that they use to communicate in and out between different dimensions, for instance. That's a possibility. And I will end it with this. And of course, if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you again for the occasion.
Okay, any questions, folks? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Felfly, I have a couple questions for you, just comments I'd like to hear from you. One is, I know you're familiar with J. Allen Hynek, and he ran the Blue Book Project for years for the Air Force. And originally he was put in there to pretty much downplay all of these UFO sightings. And as the years went by, towards the end of his career, he pretty much came out and said, I saw on an interview, he was saying that there were too many unexplained UFO incidences that absolutely they couldn't explain and had to be something that wasn't of this world. Can you comment on that?
Well, actually, I didn't see that particular interview, but what I learned about the Blue Project is that anything that would look an actual bona fide UFO was apparently not included or given an explanation that could be natural. So since he was the one responsible of it, I'd say that maybe at some point he wanted to take it off his chest, because many times we hear about the Blue Book that they were kind of almost like they don't want the Congress to be on their back. So if they say there's an actual UFO, we don't know what it is, where it's coming from, like it's a threat to us, basically, but we have no idea how to, control it or where it's coming from. That would be a big thing. And also maybe public panic. So anything that they really think that is a UFO was not included. Anything can be explained by some natural phenomenon or something like that was included. So then it's possible that you want to take it off its chest. But yes, so the Blue Book is more of a kind of a way to say, okay, we want to investigate them, and then at the end, well, we didn't find anything. What in reality, no, it was ongoing. They were finding things, just don't want to talk about it.
Okay. I have another one for you as well. Are you familiar with Paul Hillier?
Is it a Canadian guy?
The Canadian, when it was the Minister of Defense during the Cold War, and
oh
he came
yes,
out publicly saying that there are aliens on this
oh yeah,
planet.
I've seen that. Yes,
by many people, and he seems to be legitimate. I mean, he's someone that has been in the mix of all of that. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, actually, he even mentioned that he knows about the interaction of the US with extraterrestrials. He actually mentioned that there are a number of extraterrestrial civilizations, and he believes that there's an actual contact, an official contact with them, and he was not happy as to why it's being kept under wraps and so on. And he truly believes that no, this is something that should come out. Yes, so I personally, I believe him. I consider that what he said is genuine. Other people also, here and there, they come forward as well with this.
Yeah, and then one last one, and I won't bother you anymore here. Ari Loeb, who is I think the head of the astronomy department at Harvard, believes in extraterrestrial visitors, and he has a Galileo project he's starting. Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't actually. Thanks for mentioning. I'm gonna look at that.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right, folks. Any questions? This is really a fascinating area, and he gave us a lot to digest. I'm sure a lot of it seems really unnatural to you, and something that you probably aren't comfortable with, being that we're astronomers rather than ufologists. But I think it's a really fascinating area, and I think you did a beautiful job as far as presenting the case. I just think there's lots more to learn, and as time will go on, whether we ever find out whether they're real or not, or whether we'll ever get visited by extraterrestrials on a public basis, I have no idea. But it is an interesting subject, and I want to thank you very much, Dr. Felfly, for your presentation here.
And thanks out also for the invitation. I'm glad to also meet with you.
Okay, is anyone no question? This is a fascinating area there. You guys got to have some questions.
I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
From your own personal investigations, is there anything that stands out for you personally that would be like the most compelling evidence that you've investigated?
Do you mean within MUFON or in general? Like through research, my own research, or just through MUFON?
Yeah, I thought from like your opening bio that Mike gave, I thought I heard that you were a certified field investigator.
Yes.
And you've investigated some sightings of your own. From those personally, have you found something that you find to be the most compelling evidence to support the idea of UFOs? Or
Yeah, so basically there are, we had, for instance, cases where, I had cases where the person described UFO and then being abducted and then being put under hypnosis. And then the description given, for instance, it's describing details of beings, for instance, that took him and so on. So that's, for instance, one of them. Another, you have, for instance, actual images being sent. And, we process the images through software to make sure that, it's not fabricated, it's not made up, it's genuine, and so on. And again, the images look, actually one of these ones of them as well. And then we have, for instance, people who report, I don't want to call it limitation, but it's like missing time, for instance. And then they were either they woke up at night, the time was something, and then suddenly it's completely different time, and so on. And then under hypnosis, because some of them will get into hypnosis, they had again been taken onto a ship and so on. So these are people who don't have really anything to gain from it. Oftentimes they say, well, I didn't know about UFO before. I just, I've seen things, I've had this, reporting it. And then you look into their background, you look into what they said, how they said it, the evidence they give you. And these are people who are really seeing them, basically. So if I compare that, for instance, to, let's say, the field of microbiology, right? So in microbiology, most people have not seen bacteria or viruses directly. They hear about it, maybe they see it in images, right? Yet everyone believes it, right? So I'd say when we compare that to things we hear from different areas, from parts of the world, and so on, we see that they're, people who don't know each other and they have similar experiences, which then makes it, and now there are more and more. And then when I hear this, I look up, sometimes I go back in time, make some research to see if there's anything, similar. And you find a lot, actually. So it's not possible that all these people are, hallucinating about the same thing, for instance, especially that there are cases of seeing UFOs, for instance, in Europe a while back, before internet, before TV, before radio. And then they described them in one city or in one country, for instance, and then a few hours later in a different country and so on. But you don't know about it at the same time. You see it reported to be seen and so on. So they couldn't have just told each other about it. And then today we see something similar, similar objects and so on, except that today we have the internet, so it goes a lot faster. So I think that what I've seen, those cases, along with the research I do and how things, you have, for instance, in Russia, they saw gray aliens that they were reported by kids, and no one believed them because they described tall gray, while the majority was supposed to be short gray. Eventually, we started having more cases where we hear about tall grays, for instance, and sometimes they look like the grays, but they're not gray, they are white, and so on. And then again, part of what I researched, some people will be visited by their aliens in their house. Then they take them on board, they teach them things, like, for instance, teach them different language. And then when they come back, they show it. I watched a video directly interviewing these people, and they talk to you in that language, except that we can't really understand any of it. One of it is that it's a language that you understand by as a whole rather than an alphabet. So it's not an alphabet. You have to be able to feel the message, and which is something that we can't do, right, as humans, for instance. And then some of them will show them their life or the life of their friends past a certain time. And then when they return and then they talk to, they wait a little bit and they eventually talk to their friends, they see that things that they saw will happen to their friends did happen at some point, and so on. So all these make it, compelling that, yes, there are things happening. Like, for instance, one case I read about also, this one did not come to me directly. It's someone was watching the moon, and he saw an actual giant ship, basically almost passing, or like a shadow passing over the moon, that what looks like really a giant object. Around the same time, there was an abduction case. Someone described, mentioned that they were abducted at about the same time, almost. So again, that adds to it. So you have different elements. You can't look at something from one angle and say, okay, that's the only what you call the definitive evidence. So not one thing alone will be definitive to say, oh yeah, because of that one thing, I believe they are aliens. But you look at these cases and then you compare them with something else, and then you do some more research, and then you look elsewhere as well and see how many people are, seeing things. And when you have photographic evidence as well, it's not just a story, you actually see it. And then when you have abductions, when you have like marks on the body, some people get sick because of it, because of an encounter like with a gas that was released. For instance, like a guy in Canada, he had an experience like that. Others get healed, like I said, and then it's not us doing that, right? And then others, they are taken on board, and then they are shown, for instance, planets or solar systems, and then they come and describe them in details without even having any knowledge of them. Even something like this has been described in ancient Sumerian texts, where they depict certain stars before we even knew that could have astronomy and so on. And then when we discover those Sumerian tablets and ancient civilization, it starts to make sense. So all this together has to be taken to be as the evidence, as a definitive evidence, rather than taking one one incident only. So that's basically how I go about it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Any other questions, folks? Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Felfly. That was a very interesting and enlightening speech, and I hope that all of us kind of reflect on it a little bit and have some fun with it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and I appreciate the invitation. Got met with you, and yeah, I wish you the best as well. Hopefully, we'll
Thank you,
Thank you.
God bless. All right. Okay, folks. Is Doug Christensen here finally? Or did he give up on us? Jerry? Is he listed?
I see him in the meeting.
Doug's been here, Mike, but he lost his audio.
Oh, okay. So we'll save that for another time. Does anyone have anything that they want to talk about at the meeting that would be something we should talk about? Okay, I don't have anything other than I was going to have Doug talk a little bit. We lost Jeff. I'd asked him if he had anything to talk about, but he said no. So, Jerry, anything new with you that you want to talk about?
I don't believe so. I shared a little about the Webb telescope. Got its first light last week. Guillermo sent an email. Talked a little about that at the warm up.
Okay.
So that's up and operating, and the first they're aligning the 18 segmented mirrors.
Yeah. Okay. Normally we have the raffle here, and Jeff did his magic with the dice, and Dennis Leclerc is our winner tonight. So Dennis, you'll be receiving a Starbucks card in the mail, hopefully within the week. And congratulations. I don't even know if he's here, but hopefully he is.
Dennis is here.
Okay. Well, congratulations, Dennis. Okay. I don't have anything else to say, so I'm going to close the meeting unless someone would like to say something. All right. Let's consider the meeting closed, and everyone take care. Hopefully you don't get sick like I did. And God willing, I'll see you guys a month from now, and hopefully maybe we'll be able to have some meetings over there at Oak Park where we can all physically meet and have a guest speaker, whether it would be on Zoom or whether in the flesh. So good night, everyone. Take care.
Good night, everyone.